Let's talk about the composition of the wall, actually what goes into a wall, because right now Revit has given you some kind of a composition. You can obviously check it and modify it, but in my case, I want to start from zero. I want to start from scratch. So I'm going to delete all of these, or even better, if you're a newbie, hi. I'll select all of this. And actually, you can see that you can change the type of wall that you're choosing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select an absolutely generic one. So there's this one that is called generic 200. I'll click on this one and you'll see there's absolutely nothing happening because there's just a single material. I'll select it and I'll hit CS on my keyboard, which means create similar. This will become one of your new friends as well. So CS, draw my wall wherever, and let's modify it. Now, the way you modify a wall, or you talk about all of its compositions or some of the extra stuff we're going to see a little bit later on, is by selecting it and going to the properties at the top where it says edit type. Okay, so this is where if you click it, we would create a completely new type of a wall. And then we're going to start building in parameters into it and giving it all the juicy stuff that actually makes a wall in Revit, all right? So the first thing, this is already a wall called generic. I want to duplicate this so I can create a new one. There's no create new in Revit in most of the cases, or like 99% of them. You always duplicate something that already exists because Revit is built in such a way that it cannot exist, let's say, without a single wall. There's always at least one that needs to stay inside. All right. So I'll duplicate this and I'll call it 00. And this is just so that it stacks it on top. I'll call it 00 exterior brick wall. All right. Now this wall is duplicated. The type, at least, the type of wall is created by duplicating an existing one. And what I'm going to do is here at the bottom, I'll hit the preview button. So this would give me the kind of like the layers we were looking at a little bit earlier, even though right now there's nothing. In order for me to change this, I would come to structure here and hit edit. All right. And one other thing, just this is a pro tip, never look at it in plan. You see here at the bottom, instead of plan, just go in section. In my opinion, it's always a little bit more interesting to look at it this way because it also unlocks certain options for you. So if I go back here in floor plan, you'll see things like modify, merge region, sweeps, reveals, blah, 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 became unavailable for us because these are things we examine in section, all right? So by default, just leave it at section. Trust me, it'll just make your life easier. One less thing to think about, do it once, you're good to go. I'll give it a height of 3000 so that I can zoom in a little bit on it. Here at the top, you have stuff just like it's telling me it's a basic wall family. You don't have to think about it at this point. The total thickness, and you can already see that Revit can start calculating things like resistance and thermal mass. But this also comes with the addition of materials which have this information built into them. And don't worry about it, Revit gives you some base to start with this. I want you to pay attention to the following thing. Here at the top, it says exterior side. Here at the bottom says interior side. And then we have these two gray lines, which tell us that there's a core boundary. So now Revit is looking at the composition of a wall and is looking at it and it says, you know what? I recognize that your wall has things which, let's just call it fluff for a second, your gypsum wall board, your exterior panels or whatever it is. But there's also the core of your wall, okay? This is going to be the structure of the wall. We can already kind of define it this way. So let's just go back into it. One of the things that I would like to mention to you now is that things that go into the core boundary are not always necessarily just structure. And this can save you a lot of time and also graphics and also the way you draw stuff. Anyway, so we'll see you in a second. So you see that we have the structure here and I'll do a very extremely typical Canadian wall composition because of our winter, okay? And it would be a metal stud composition. So I would do 152 millimeters, which is the very typical like 6-inch stud, okay? And I'll just insert a bunch more. And what I would like you to notice now is that the function is already predefined. But if I hit the drop-down menu, you can see that I have options. So Revit can already categorize. And keep in mind, Revit, alongside any other BIM software, is just a way to hyper-categorize data, all right? That's its only function, and this is how it's able to do analysis. This is how we're able to pull out quantities. This is how we're able to pull out schedules. This is it, the hyper-categorization of things. So I can say that a particular layer in my wall, it's either a structure, a substrate. Substrate is usually something like plywood or OBS board. This would be the one. Thermal layer, so think about air gaps, think about insulation. Well, that's it. And then you have finish 1 and finish 2, and those are usually the things that come after after your insulation, right? So those are things like gypsum board, those are things like your brick, your aluminum panels, your stone, whatnot have you. And the thing is that Revit, in putting these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it creates a hierarchy of importance, because if you have two elements that are colliding with each other, let's say finish 5 would give way to a thermal layer, meaning that a finish 5 right here, which is the lowest on the hierarchy, even though it's the highest number, would never go through a thermal layer. The thermal layer would always take precedence, okay? So in this particular case, I'm just gonna go ahead and create my, my wall composition. Why do I keep hitting insert? So let's say a typical brick, 90 millimeters here in Canada. Then I usually have a 1 inch or 25 millimeters of an airspace. Right behind it, I would put in 100 millimeters sprayed on insulation, which is usually my air barrier 2, depending on the product you're using. Then on top of this, I would have an exterior grade gypsum board. So, and I'll keep it in the core boundary, and I'll see why in a second. Very, very important. And then when I go inside, just because I want to, you know, keep everything very soundproof, let's say I'll put resilient bars of 22 millimeters, and then I'll just bring this all the way down, and this would be my gypsum board of 16 millimeters. So that means that I overdid it here. So let's say if I just remove, you see that the layers are now created, right? We have my 152 structure. I have my exterior gypsum board on which usually I can put my membranes. I have my structure, sorry, not structure. I have my insulation, airspace, and brick. The thing is that right now everything's called structure. It doesn't have any materials, and this is why Revit, the only thing it's able to tell me is like, hey, listen, man, like your wall is thick 418 millimeters, but there's no properties to it, all right? So let's start assigning materials to it. I'll start from the outside. I'll hit material, and there's like these little 3 dots. So this menu would open up, and I would just type in the search bar, brick. Again, if you work in an office, you might have a lot of material that are already created and ready for you to go, which also have the rendering texture. So there's so many steps that you're covering in one shot. So, but okay, I'll hit brick. For thermal layer, so for my air layer, keep in mind, you don't always have to go through the process here. If you know the absolutely exact name of the material you want to put in, you can literally just punch it in. So if I type air and hit tab, you would see that Revit said, oh yeah, that material actually exists. I don't have to give you an air. If I say air, it will say, hey man, that material is invalid. Please enter a valid one. Sounds good to me. I'll just stick it to air. All right. Now I need insulation. So insulation, rigid insulation. Sure. Let's do this one. Then I have my gypsum board. So if I type gypsum wall board, that works. See, I can actually copy this title and slap it right down there. This would be, I don't think that by default Revit has resilient channel, but it has stud. So some kind of a metal stud layer. Voila. And I can copy and paste it here. Now, one thing I want you to pay attention to. So this is the quick and dirty way of doing it. If you work in a company where you actually want to extract quantities, all right, instead of just having metal stud layer, you would have a specific material which is properly described. You would have something that says, let's say, a 22 millimeter resilient channel. Perfect. So you can actually take out the square footage of that so that you can make your calculations at the end. Instead of saying just gypsum wall board, being super generic, I would say, no, this is 16 millimeter type whatever gypsum wall board. Or let's say type X if it's fire rated. Here, instead of just gypsum wall board again for 30 millimeters, I would have a title which explains the whole thing. And I'll be able to say, this is 13 millimeters exterior grade gypsum wall board. The same thing for the insulation. Ideally, you would specify it because you can have multiple types of insulation, even multiple types of rigid insulation within a project. So in general, you want to be able to create all of these materials so that you can use Revit to the fullest extent, okay? And the last thing we need to take care of is all the layering here. So we can agree, hopefully, that that metal stud layer, it's a structure. I hope that we can agree that this gypsum wall board is not a structure, but it's a substrate because I will use it to attach my insulation onto it. My rigid insulation fits into the thermal layer description. My air air layer description, fantastic. And my brick, I would put it as finish 4 because it's not quite as flimsy as, let's say, it would be my gypsum board on the inside. So metal stud layer, I would say this is 4, and then that this is 5, okay? So now we can see that my wall actually starts to look like a real thing, you know, and this is great. And I'll hit OK, and I'll hit OK again. And you can see that all the layers inside my wall were created. If I select it here in 3D and type BX, it would create a bounding box around it, not to be confused with BS. All right. So you can see all the layers that are happening inside. Yeah, okay, fantastic.